It's just a thought here because I'm just thinking about it, thinking about what's going on and what kind of other, how many different things are at play. Let's put it that way. So this caught my eye a while ago, and I wanted to come back to it because there's some interesting things here to discuss. But first, some housekeeping. I'm actually not going to do a Thursday study review this week. I'm just back from travel and I'm trying to get my head back in order. And there was one article that came up while I was away that deserves a decent amount of time to dig into and rip to shreds. If it's worthy of being ripped to shreds, we'll find out. I haven't read it all the way through yet, but I am suspicious. Let's put it that way. So I'm going to return to Thursday review next week, but no Thursday review this week. But the reason this one comes to mind is this article comes to mind is one of the normative principles of science is the idea of communality, which is to say scientific knowledge should be open and accessible to all. And it's because of this that we have things like reporting and peer review and publications in journals and what have you. That is part of the goal. You're supposed to be sharing information with each other. You're supposed to be publishing your results. And that is certainly where it gets interesting because now you have the next generation kind of things coming up, which is more and more peer-reviewed journals are pushing towards open access. Rather than what's traditionally been done. You might have observed if you've gone to look for a particular study that you can't get it easily because it's behind a paywall. That has been longstanding practice with digital journal articles, that it is very difficult to access an article that a journal has unless you are a subscriber behind a paywall. Newspapers kind of do the same thing now. Newspapers do the same thing. Nature does that for some of their articles, not this one. Obviously, this one is freely out there, but it can happen for sure. So it's something to be interesting about, and he is obviously, as you might guess from the title here, open science done wrong will compound inequities. He's got a little bit of a woke bent, I would say, but I haven't read this all the way through yet, so we'll have to go through it and get some commentary here. But as always, if you are interested, join up in Locals and join us for some fun times. Of course, there will be more things that go up behind there because I'm working on some snazzy stuff behind the scenes, actually, as much as I can with everything going on. Anyway, 10 years ago, a new PhD graduate looking for my next position, I found myself in the academic cold. Nothing says you're an outsider more like a paywall, more than a paywall asking for $38 for one article. That is very true. That happens a lot. That's the difference between like a newspaper and a journal thing, is that if you're not a subscriber and you want access to something that's behind the paywall, you got a one-time fee of something like that. As a subscriber, though, you can get, of course, all of it the same way, but subscription fees are way, way, way more, quite often, for a journal than it is for a newspaper or for a news site online. So yeah, no, I totally understand that. I can understand the gentleman's frustration here. That fueled my advocacy of open science and ultimately drove me to research its implementation. Now, open science is mainstream, increasingly embedded in policies and expected in practice. But the ways in which it is being implemented can have unintended consequences, and these must not be ignored. Okay? Since 2019, I've led On Merit, a project funded by the European Commission that uses a mixture of computational and qualitative methods to investigate how open science affects the research system. Many in the movement declare equity as a goal, but reality is not always on track for that. Indeed, I fear that without more critical thought, open science could just become an extension of privilege. Our recommendations for what to consider are out this week. Okay, this was a couple of weeks ago, and I admittedly have not read that. But there you go, with the equity kind of piece. What does equity typically in practice refer to is equality of outcomes. Just bear that in mind. That's not to say I'm the idea of communality. I'm actually very much for the idea of open access journals. I think all of you watching this right now should have access to every single journal publication in every single journal that there is. You should be able to access anything at any time because science is supposed to be open to everybody. Scientific knowledge is supposed to belong to all. Um, there is the communications questions that come in there afterwards and what have you. That's like how the hell do we prevent like misinterpretations or what like that? And the reality is you're not going to prevent misinterpretations of complex science by somebody who's a layperson reading the article, but should still be absolutely 100% available to everyone. And we'll see what this gentleman says about the extension of privilege kind of thing. Open science is a vague mix of ideals. Need to be a lot more specific then, would be my immediate comment on that. Can you get specific? Overall, advocates aim to increase transparency, accountability, equity, and collaboration in knowledge production by increasing access to research results, articles, methods, and tools. This means that data and protocols should be freely shared in high-quality repositories, and research articles should be available without subscriptions or reading fees. Okay, this is just one thing I want to make a point on, because wanting everything for free, I'm sorry, nothing is free. Even open access is not free. And there's a reason I say that, because it's when somebody goes to publish a peer-reviewed article, quite often they do not get paid for it. In fact, usually what happens is they are paying the publisher to publish it. They are not getting paid for it. And that comes out of whatever grants and what have you. So, for example, if a scientist gets a grant, they do the work, they've then written it up, they've sent it to a journal. Part of that grant funding that they received can be used to pay the publication costs that would normally come out of pocket to the journal. That happens quite frequently. The thing here, of course, then, is the scientist involved doing it gets nothing. A lot of the editors doing peer review get nothing. They do that on the side. It's expected as part of your job, if you're a scientist, that you are publishing and you are doing peer review of other people's work. You don't get paid any extra for it. I certainly have not. In the same breath, the articles do charge, the journal publishers do charge subscription fees. Universities, typically if you're at a university, there'll be like bulk subscription or something like that a university pays, so that everybody who's logging in from a university IP address or a university login, if you're off campus, can get access to the journals associated with that publisher, or with that professional society, or what have you. That is not always the case. Not all universities subscribe to all things, so it's subscribed to every journal publisher, so I mean, you have to deal with that. And then the reading fees are just ancillary. So what the gentleman is talking about at the beginning really does happen, and a bunch of you may have had it happen also. But it happens because, you got to pay the bills for the publishers. You got to pay the bills for a lot of these publications. A lot of them are still in print also, and most of the charges go into our printing costs, which it's pointless at this point because everything is going digital. As much as we dislike it, I would prefer to still have print copies, because I don't know if you noticed, because I like with one of the articles I have here from a couple of, the Zero Carbon article right here, always have hard copies myself, because I'm drawing and doodling and well, not doodling, but I'm I'm making my comments in the margins, and then that's what I do. I do the same thing whenever I do peer review. I always have a print copy in front of me. But that doesn't have to happen necessarily at the journal level. But I still prefer print copies of things, because it's a lot harder to edit them after the fact. But that's just the note there of what that actually goes toward, because I know a lot of folks watching this probably don't know that actually necessarily. Making all that happen is expensive, yes, because the thing is, if you go without the subscriptions or the reading fees, here, that particularly what the subscription fees that universities pay, because usually they're paying for a bulk subscription for hundreds or thousands of people to be able to access from the university IP address. So universities pay a huge chunk of change. I don't exactly know the number, but they pay a huge chunk of change. So if you start taking away the subscription fees that are associated with the university paying that bill, you got to make it up somehow, actually, with the journal publisher. So it's not free, that's for sure. But making all of it happen to overcome that is expensive. Wealthy institutions and regions can afford this better than poorer ones. At my university, in a high-income nation, I know I am privileged. In collaboration to introduce open science at Ukrainian universities, including those displaced by conflict post-2014, I've been privy to difficult conversations about how to pay publication fees that are 3 times a professor's monthly salary, and how to meet data sharing requirements to be eligible for funding when institutional support is lacking. And privilege comes in many forms. For instance, the fact that career advancement criteria don't reward open practices, plus puts early career adherence, at a distinct disadvantage. Okay. I actually don't have a problem with this, and the fact that it is a socioeconomic problem, really. In all seriousness, I mean, a lot of what I go for the professional side, I can get it through the university. A lot of what I go for this, I can't. Well, not for this, but a lot of what I review here, and I'm trying to make sure I do this myself for you guys, so you can check out the articles I'm reviewing yourself. Is I go for open access articles myself, because then I have the same problem that he's talking about. That it is otherwise quite expensive to get a hold of a journal article that is behind a paywall. So I can actually understand what he's talking about here. That is a very real thing from a socioeconomic perspective. It is very difficult if you're talking about a professor to get an article, and some universities and institutions in poorer parts of the world, yeah, I can understand that that's not going to help get things done. So in reality, I actually quite understand the sentiment. Really, I do. Failing to address structural inequalities. See, this is something I don't like. This is just like they're starting to use the word equality and equity interchangeably. Just bear that in mind. Directly means that the advantage of those who are already privileged will grow, especially given that they have the most influence over how open science is implemented. A particularly pressing issue is open access publication fees, in which the benefit of free readership is being offset by new barriers to authorship. To support OA publishing, journals commonly charge authors. That is also true. That is something I have noticed also, is that different journals now, if they're offering open access as an option, may charge you an additional fee to make it open access when you go to submit your article for publication. It's not a charge that it may be a charge that's offset by some of the subscription fees and what have you for readership, but I, as the author of the article in question, have to pay an additional fee, oftentimes, not all the time, but oftentimes, to get something published. There's lots of money involved in these different things, as it were. To support OA publishing, journals commonly charge authors, and charges are rising as the practice expands. There's also the inflation thing going on right now, so that's the other problem. But here's the thing. Here is the certain thing with that, is that part of the reason they still do that is because it's not, well, that's not the right way to say it, but generally speaking, I have observed that too. Although I've also observed something different, because there are different publishers now that are just charging a flat fee regardless, because they're moving toward more open access, so they're starting to do that. I've seen that with one or two particular journal publishers in question as I've been looking through that. So that's not entirely accurate. That it's, well, he's saying journals commonly charge. Okay, so I can get that, but I want to make that point for you guys, is that that's not true of everybody. It's true of a lot of journals, that they are actually charging an extra charge to get you to do open access, which makes no damn sense, because it's actually cheaper to be digital than to print everything over and over again. My group and others have found that article processing charges are creating a two-tiered system in which richer research teams publish more open access articles in the most prestigious journals. One analysis of 37,000 articles in hybrid parent journals and their fully open access mirrors with the same editorial board and accepted standards found that geographic diversity of authors was much greater for non-open access articles than for open access articles. Okay, I gotta make a point on one thing here, in that, well, you're okay. I get where this is going here. With the argument that with geographic diversity, there's different parts of the world that are poorer than others and therefore can't pay for the open access charge. But might be many other reasons for that I could think of, and it may, and the article I cite there may talk about it, but I wonder also what the policy is in different countries. And the reason I bring this up is, like, for some data sets and sources in certain countries, the data is really ridiculously hard to get because in some places um that is considered like matters of national security, and so it's not like the country wants it out there publicly, or the data out there publicly available. That is the case in some countries. It's not so much in the U.S. or Europe, or in some of, or in a lot of other countries. But there are some countries where that's like that, where the data is considered matters of national security. So I have to, knowing that differences in like data availability for scientists to even have it, let alone publish anything off of it, I do have to wonder if there's some restrictions in some countries where they don't allow for open access publication because of governmental restrictions and things like that. There's very big differences with with some of the institutional side of things with scientific practice when it comes to different countries. And so that's why I don't necessarily agree that it is entirely just we can't pay for it, as much as it could also be whatever kinds of restrictions are going on. That's just a thought for me. I'm not saying it's not considered, but I'm just bringing it up here. Let's see. Another analysis found that authors of open access articles were more likely to be male, senior, federally funded, and working at prestigious universities. Worse still, citation advantages are linked to open access mean that the academically rich will get even richer. That open science should increase inequity should alarm science reformers. At the very least, they should commit to monitoring how researchers are affected. To be sure, equity is not the sole priority for many advocates. When my team first announced its project, some critics objected. They argued that the key aims of open science are to improve research integrity by making the processes and products more amenable to inspection, and boosting efficiency by making others' work reusable. Still, as our work has shown, equity is often cited as a key claim. Even those rooting for equity often argue that we should first enable access and then consider unintended side effects such as marginalization of authors from low-income countries. But how change is implemented will have long-lasting consequences. Once new forms of inequity are in place, it will be too late to fix the system efficiently. Interesting. It's an interesting commentary with that. I mean, equity, if you're talking about equality of outcome again, which is typically what the word equity means when it's actually in practice, you're not necessarily going to get to having everybody have equal access to equal access to open access publication, or equal ability to open access publications if you can't enable access to everywhere first, because of what you're talking about with different countries and what have you. May not be able to access that kind of a system to begin with, or it's very difficult to access that kind of a system to begin with. It's just a thought here, because I'm just thinking about what's going on and what kind of how many different things are at play. Let's put it that way. How changes in okay. How can we ensure that the open knowledge creation becomes fairer than it is now? Define fairer would be my immediate comment there. First, we need a more shared understanding and global dialogue. Open science is an umbrella term for coalition of diverse practices with sometimes conflicting aims of transparency, participation, and equity. We desperately need to untangle these. Second, reform should encompass the research system as a whole rather than country or region-based policies that target specific practices. The UNESCO recommendation on open science is an example of how this can work. Our recommendations include more focus on shared infrastructure, as well as on who participates and how. That means discussing ways to have open access without publishing fees, plus making open practices cheaper and more valued by promotion and grant evaluators. I do think that open science can bring much good. Like many of its advocates, I aim to make research more accessible and collaborative, and to establish a system that rewards current merit, not past or current privilege. Any potential for open science to compound inequalities must be visually monitored by the academic community, otherwise we idealists risk scoring an own goal. So I'm going to say off the bat, I don't actually disagree with the fact that it is very cost prohibitive. Um, I myself have not done a whole lot of open access publishing professionally because it is expensive. um, and so I can understand where he's coming from with that. Whether or not you get a quality of outcome and how to go about doing it, well, whether or not you get equity, if you're referring to it as a quality of outcome, is just a mess to begin with. But you know, making sure you get access first, and that open access is something that can be offered as an option in every country is the bigger thing, I would think, rather than just making sure straight out of the gate that you're going to have equity, if you will. But it should be certainly interesting. Like I said, I'm kind of on the fence with this one. I'm always leery of it when I see equity because it means, it's a very woke term at this point. But I understand where he's coming from with it. Um, and I get where the concern is with regard to paying for publications. Because, like I said, something I would dearly love to see, every publisher becomes open access, primarily because I think every person out there publicly, every person in the public, every single one of you watching should be able to access peer-reviewed, published science and reports without the paywall necessarily, or with a much lower paywall than it needs to be. Because I can understand the profit motive with different journals. I mean, they got to pay the bills. They got to pay the bills, and that's part of the other conversation in this. Is like, okay, where are the publishing costs in here involved that the journals can trim the fat and move towards open access more easily without having to charge more for open access? That is an internal thing on the journal side of things that you got to take care of. Got to take care of before you can get to open access, publicly available journal articles for everybody. And even then, I would still be like, I do think there still should be, to a certain degree, a charge, um, upon getting the journal, but it should be lower than what it is. If only because they, for all the crap and all the flack that I could give editorial staff and what have you, and I have on this channel, um, a lot of them do a good job. A lot of them do a good job in copy editing and proofing and all this other kind of stuff, and moving it through a system, making sure, facilitating back and forth between editors and peer reviewers and the authors. They do a good job generally, and I don't hold anything against them with that. Peer review is certainly not perfect, but I don't hold anything against them with that, and so I do think like any business, like any business that's involved, they do need to get paid for their services, employees to the publisher. And I think that's fair to ask for publication subscription fees. So I don't think no subscription fee necessarily, but probably vastly reduced from what it is. Would probably be better as things go more digital. But like I said, I would still love to have print copies too, because they're harder to edit, and I, like I said, like to write on my articles. That's it. What do you think? What do you think about this article? I'll link it for you, of course, in the description as always. Like I said, no Thursday review this week, but of course, come on by next week. Next week will be fun. I'm telling you, next week will be fun. That's it for now. Let me know what you think. Comment on the video, share the video, subscribe to the channel if you like this video, hit the like button on your way out. Of course, come on over and join us on Locals, where we have all sorts of fun. Until next time, I'm Adrian, and I hope you stay curious, my friends.